Why don't you start the interview?
Wait, should we introduce ourselves first?
No, start with the story. I feel like you're already there.
I'm on a track now. So yeah, it's a really weird object because I mean it's kind of this disembodied thing. Like you get the feeling that there's more to the story, which is really how Brent and I have been working for quite a while now with these open-ended narratives. So there's some evidence here that something happened because the glass is broken and there's wires coming out of the bottom and there's a dent on it. So that this was a standing streetlight and somehow something made it fall and sort of get broken. And then of course there's the layers of us transforming it or remaking it in another material and kind of the metaphors involved in that. But in terms of the story of just this object, I think, we were thinking about some sort of incident that happened that caused a streetlight to be broken and then this part of the streetlight fell off and landed somewhere and it was broken, and that's sort of the part that we're focusing on in this piece, but there really is a much larger scene around it. There's the broken light pole, there's the street corner that it was on, which the title of this piece alludes to because the title is On Oak and Maple, because it's simultaneously a study of the two woods, oak and maple. Oak on the exterior and maple on the interior, but then oak and maple are names of streets that you hear in like every single city.
Yeah, maybe the location of where it happened, some street corner.
Yes. And there's definitely more to the scene, and this is something I think this project, this piece, will eventually become larger, a part of a larger body of work where the scene somehow gets fleshed out.
Yeah, it's sort of an object-based version of an approach to making that we've taken with photography and film, where we've been working with these two characters that Shana and I play, and we've been doing these sort of emergent narratives where we start with very little information about these characters, and then like through working with them we start to develop who they are and what their backstory is, and we start to learn about them in that way. And I think with this piece we're sort of creating the first element of a sort of object-based emergent narrative that will play out sculpturally. So the idea is that this is one piece in a series of related pieces that will perhaps be shown together, perhaps be shown in different locations, and then sort of understood as a body of work after having seen them in different locations, or I don't know, we're still sort of sorting out how all of that will play out.
I think also it's going to represent an opportunity for further material study too, especially wood, because if you think about like a scene where this might have happened, any street corner, you may have to replicate concrete, grass, garbage in the gutter, water, just all these different things. And of course it's totally up to us what the scene looks like, but there's an interesting opportunity to just work with the materials and try to get it to replicate all these different textures.
Right. Don't forget the dead cat.
Well, this is one of the ideas. Now Brent's going into territory where we have not yet fully decided what we're going to show. But yeah, that was one of the ideas was, if perhaps, the scene could start to flesh out exactly what happened. Yeah, what if there is like maybe an animal ran in front of a car and that's what caused the streetlight to get crashed into? Maybe that animal's there. How do you,
I feel like
that in wood? So we have to...
And I feel like there's much more to the story that we're just sort of scratching the surface, and we don't know what the rest of the story is. But I think it's also maybe useful to trace the history of this piece in a different way, also, to kind of understand why it was made and why it sort of launched us onto this line of thinking. We were invited to participate in a show at the Center for Furniture and Craftsmanship in Maine, and it was a lighting show. So primarily, this is sort of a group show with primarily like contemporary lighting designers. And the person who was curating it, Chris Pullman, is a friend of ours, and he asked us to be in the show, and I think he knew that we were going to kind of throw it for a loop a little bit and do something a bit non-standard and more sculptural. So our response was to submit something that didn't light up at all. But it was more about, it's like the sculptural representation of a light. So it was kind of an anomaly in this show of like highly designed contemporary lighting. And here we're presenting this like strange relic of a sort of historic lamppost. And then also the fact that it was at the Center for Furniture and Craftsmanship, part of the audience there was, people who are very interested in woodworking and stuff. So that's part of the reason why we chose to use figured maple on the interior and quarter sawn oak on the outside. And so part of it was playing into that audience a little bit. But I think like through doing that, now we're kind of like, okay, what do we do with this object now? And that's sort of where this new line of thinking is coming, where it starts, it becomes a first component of a larger narrative.
Right, like we're taking
Using similar
something,
techniques,
like something that originally felt a bit like an anomaly in our portfolio. It's like now we're reabsorbing it back into our body of work and kind of, incorporating it into something that's really familiar to us actually, which is these kind of emergent narratives. Yeah.
But I think that, so there's a way of understanding our work which requires like experiencing the whole body of work, or like many parts of that body of work. But there's also, I think with every piece we do, we try to also make that piece stand up on its own and be able to sort of speak for itself as an autonomous object as well. So I think that's part of what we're trying to do here. It's like we want this to be something that is an interesting piece, a satisfying piece to see on its own. But then there's that added layer of this possibility of having seen another component to it at another gallery, a year ago. And then also like what happens as a viewer with your memory of that, and how does it change the piece, like when you sort of don't have it there to compare it directly, and you remember it differently than it actually was, and so you start sculpting the narrative in a different way that we do. I'm really kind of interested in that fallibility of memory and how that changes your perceptions of things. So it's a bit of an experiment that way, kind of playing with the viewer as a medium in a way.
Yeah, I mean it parallels so much of what's going on in our work, where we're looking at history as this thing that is just bits and pieces of information, and all the connecting tissue between it sometimes starts to degrade over time, and so you feel like you're only ever understanding things in bits and pieces with all sorts of other people's perceptions on top of it, and it starts to fade more as you get farther in time. And I think that's just something, thinking about history that way has been something that's been really influential to our work. So I feel like now, because we think about that so much, it's like somehow a natural way to make art too. So the fact that it isn't put together in a linear, like really clear, understandable narrative is so critical to what it is we're trying to talk about, that it makes sense. I think it all comes together, and I don't think that's really a difficulty that we're sort of fighting against. It's more something that we use as a medium in what we do.
I think that we really kind of value that those outside perspectives and that commentary and like the reaction of the viewer in a way that like I think we listen very carefully to it and sort of let that feed back into the new work that we make. I think we try to study that pretty closely.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah. Like, what is the most helpful one? Because I mean, really, what happened for me is that there was like a lot of really important moments that kind of all coalesced, right? But I know, like, actually, when I was in undergrad, I ended up working for an artist as a studio assistant, and it was super valuable to just sort of just see how one goes about making a living by being an artist. And of course her practice was just one example, but it brought me into the whole concept that if you're an artist and you're trying to make a living, you really also have to have business skills and just basics like that, where I was like, oh, it isn't just sitting down and making your thing. There's like so much more that goes into it. So that was really helpful. And the other thing that she did, which sounds minor, but it was actually great, was that she sent me on tons of errands all over Milwaukee. And this was before people had cell phones, so it was like paper maps and like looking addresses up in the phone book, and then getting in my car and just like driving around the city. And it really helped me just get out into the city and see places I'd never seen before, because amazingly, the errands I had to run were literally all over town. And it sort of just helped me feel confident with like getting out in the city too. So then when I knew stuff was going on downtown or in some neighborhood, I didn't feel, there was some familiarity. And I think that was really important because I went to school with a lot of people who kind of never left campus, and I don't know if that was fear or if it was just, it seemed too far away or something, but I never felt that way, and I think it helped me, just join the art community like in a more natural way.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, certainly for me it began in school, and there's certain things that certain professors said that really stuck with me, like, when you're starting out, just say yes to everything.
Yeah, I had that advice too.
That was really good advice,
Mm-hmm.
I think. And it just sort of set the ball rolling, and I'm glad that I took that advice. And
Mm-hmm.
And then I think in many ways just being influenced by our peers that we were collaborating with, and people who were sort of doing similar things to us. We were doing, when I just got out of school, we were doing a lot of like one night events where we put a ton of work into some big party where there's all sorts of installations and things like that. And then I was looking at other people who were doing that too, like Rust Spot. And I think certainly that was influential. Just seeing what they were doing and kind of, I don't know, trying to get a foot in the door with them. And I ended up showing once with them, and then just I don't know. It was this sort of mindset of. It's kind of a do-it-yourself sort of mindset where you weren't dependent on the institutions for validation. You kind of created your own venues and you made the scene happen yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And I know the reason Brent just gestured just now, like Rust Spot,
right? Yeah,
is because right around the corner from us, Katie Martin's piece, because Katie was a Rust Spot person. So anyone who does not know what Rust Spot is, I have no idea. If you can like Google it and anything will come up. But Katie Martin was definitely an influential member, and it's interesting because her piece in this show brings me back to Rust Spot, and it has a lot to do with the shovel that's painted one monochromatic color, because a very influential piece that she created for Rust Spot was, okay, now we're coming back full circle here. It's a car that was crashed into a light pole outside of the Rust Spot, that she managed to light, even though it was on the exterior of the building, she managed to light it in a very gallery sort of dramatic way, but the whole car was just monochromatically painted like a matte sort of baby blue. Yeah. So her piece that she made for
including
this
the windows
show,
and everything.
Yeah, so it was very haunting because you couldn't see into the car. It was sort of rendered this bizarre sculpture, and so the fact that she painted this shovel a monochromatic color just really reminded me of that. And this space, is sort of Rust Spot-esque in that it's an old warehouse.
It's sort of network of hallways.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. So there's an interesting parallel there. So see, we probably influenced each other, and now it's all just coming together. Yeah, you probably have lots of people in this show actually who over the years have influenced each other. Yeah, I'm sure
that's very true.
So not so much just that somehow this group of artists is like influencing the Milwaukee art scene or beyond that, but that we're influencing each other, I think is really important, because Milwaukee's a small art scene, so we all know what each other is doing and we keep up with one another, I think, that way. And so I think there's a lot of cross-pollination going on that way.
I love that it looped back to that. It's so good. I think let's end there. Yeah. I think that was perfect.